If the lighting is a little weird in this video, it's because I'm filming later in the day than I normally do, and I have my ring light, but there's a window right here, so I feel like that light is coming through a little strangely. I don't really know, but we're just gonna roll with it. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mary, and today's video is going to be my worst / most disappointing books that I read in 2020. Now, just because I don't like these books doesn't mean that you can't like them, doesn't mean that you shouldn't read them, and doesn't mean that you have bad taste if you did like these books. I'm gonna try to explain what about the books I didn't like, so as to make it more clear, like, my preferences for things. So I just wanted to get that out there. You can't all like everything, so it's totally fine. And then I also did want to mention that I'm cutting off my read by date at November 30th. I think that's the last day in November. So all of these books are books that I read prior to December of this year. My December reads will go into next year's sort of ranking. But without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and get into the books that I really didn't like. I do have 2 DNFs on this list, and I am just going to let you know what those are. I DNF'd American Assassin by Vince Flynn over the summer. That was a prequel to the Mid-Trap series, which is a, like, espionage thriller. I think there were a lot of things about that book that I didn't really like. I didn't like that it sort of almost used a chosen one trope with Mid-Trap and made him seem... I thought it was going to be, like, his background, how the CIA or whatever secret agency thing found him. That's the type of thing that I like watching on TV and, like, watching in movies a lot. I like Criminal Minds, and, like, I used to really love the show Alias, which was about, like, the CIA. And so I think stuff like that is really interesting in concept to me, but reading about it just wasn't for me. I ended up DNFing the book at, like, 80% because I was no longer sure what was really even going on. I also listened to that book as an audiobook, and I just think the writing style wasn't for me. I don't think I was the target audience. I think the target audience for Vince Flynn's books were, like, it's dad fiction, is what I sort of call it. But, I mean, I like Dan Brown, which I would sort of also say is similar. John Grisham, similar vein, but I like those books more. I don't know. It just didn't work for me. I wasn't into it. And then the other book that I DNF'd this year, I actually have a copy of because it's my boyfriend's book. This is Love is a Dog from Hell by Charles Bukowski. You can see how far in I got. This is a poetry collection. And, I mean, frankly, I just didn't like the writing style of these. I didn't find this very compelling. I didn't find it, like, beautiful or interesting or anything like that I'm sort of looking for when I'm looking to read a poetry collection. It just wasn't for me. So all in all, not a super huge fan of this. And I mean, I wouldn't pick up anything from Charles Bukowski again. And that's sort of all there really is to say about it. So now I'm going to get into books that I actually did finish and I just really didn't like. And the first of these is Alex and Eliza. I don't know the author of this one. I was told that this was a reimagining of Alexander Hamilton and Eliza Schuyler, their, like, love story, but I heard that the author saw Hamilton and then was really inspired to write it. So I was thinking it would either be more similar to Hamilton than it actually was, or that it would be more historically accurate, and it was just sort of neither. So I'm not really into it. I've also decided that I don't think I really like historical romance. I don't know. I just didn't feel like the characters had very much chemistry. I didn't care about the story. I could tell that there were historical inaccuracies, and I just wasn't really into it. So I didn't finish that. It's part of a series that I will not be continuing in 2021. Another book that I really didn't like was Brother in Ice by Alicia. This is she's a Spanish novelist, so this is translated from Spanish and Catalan. Did the lighting just get really weird? I can't tell. This was sort of sold to me as being an exploration of, like, polar explorers. It's about this 30-something-year-old artist who is really interested in these polar explorers and how she uses that to, like, connect with her real life. And the Brother in Ice, she has a brother who is on the spectrum, so he has autism. The autism rep in here wasn't very good, in my opinion. I just felt like she being the author, was using that as, like, a scapegoat to title this book and give it some, like, push behind it to make it seem interesting, and just not a whole lot happened in this. I wouldn't recommend it. I was mostly interested in this because it is a hybrid novel, so it has, like, journal entries from polar explorers. It has pictures in here and, like, graphs, like pictures like that. I thought that was really interesting, but overall, this just wasn't for me. I didn't like it. Then some nonfiction that I didn't enjoy. I read Yes, We Still Can by Dan Pfeiffer. Dan Pfeiffer worked in Obama's White House. I can't remember what his job was now. And he also runs a podcast called Pod Save America, which I found out after I bought this book that he was one of the guys on that podcast, which sort of told me that I wouldn't really think this was that great. I just frankly thought this was kind of boring and trite and had been done before. I wanted this to be more about the historical implications that the way that the country was being run by Donald Trump versus the way that it was run by President Obama. I wanted to explore more of that and the differences that Trump has brought really to the presidency, and to show how politics are probably going to be different forever now, which is sort of what it sounded like it was going to be about, which also, like, obviously putting in a little bit of hope that things can sort of reconcile and that Americans will be able to reconcile with their political identity. I just didn't feel like it did any of that. It was just another White House memoir, and I'm bored of those. So, not for me. Didn't like it. I also didn't like 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which I think is a hot take, because I think a lot of people did like this book. There was one, it took me a really long time to read. I almost DNF'd it, and my boyfriend kept being like, you don't like it, you should just stop reading it. But I was like, no, people love this book. I have to give it a shot. So I did. That's a nonfiction sort of about, like, that the author of that wrote, like, I can't remember what the other books are called, and I haven't read them, but I've heard they're really good as well. But now I don't think I will read them, because people also seem to think 21 Lessons for the 21st Century was good. The author had a lot of opinions that I don't really agree with, and a lot of thoughts on the way that we are moving towards, like, AI and what that means, and, like, the implications that can have for certain industries that I just didn't think were sound. Also, I have an economics degree, so some of the things that he was saying, I was like, well, I mean, historically, that has not been the case. So I can't remember any examples now. But yeah, wasn't for me. I didn't love it. Again, if you did like it and really enjoy it, then I'm really happy for you. But I just didn't like it. Okay, let's talk about some really big disappointments. I reread the entire Twilight series this year. So if you haven't seen my reading blog for that, I'll link it somewhere so you can watch it if you're interested. But I also read Life and Death when I did that, which is the Twilight retelling from, with a gender bent characters. But literally all that changed was the names of the characters. They literally were just like, instead of being Edward and Bella, it was Edith and Beau, I think, was his name? I don't remember. Also, Rosalie turned into Royal, which I thought was dumb. It just, overall, like, I wish that all they had changed was Edward to being Edith and Bella to being Beau. Like, I wish, rather than changing everyone except for Charlie's gender identity, they had changed the main characters to actually, like, explore some of the differences and, like, what it looks like when you have a human hero and a vampire heroine rather than vice versa, like Twilight obviously is. But anyways, that one was just, like, really, really disappointing and kind of, I don't know, pointless. I don't know why it was released. It just was a cash grab, obviously, but I don't know. I wasn't into it. Another thing that really disappointed me this year was Once and Future by... Is it Amy Rose Capetta? Is that their name? I believe they use they, them pronouns, the author does. And I think it's a team. I think it's two authors. I don't really know. But I didn't like this one. It's YA sci-fi. And it's a sci-fi retelling of King Arthur, except for King Arthur is a girl, which I thought was really interesting. And that part was kind of interesting. There was a part where they went to the girl's home planet, and I liked that a lot. But what I really didn't like about this is, the whole time, all the characters know that it's a King Arthur retelling. That's a real story for them. So they knew what role they had to play, and I just thought that was kind of dumb. I also really didn't like the way that the representation was handled. So there's tons of rep in this book. There's, like, ace rep, queer rep, all sorts of kinds of rep, trans rep, non-binary rep. And obviously I can't speak to 99% of that to see if it was accurate. I just didn't like the way the characters, like, dealt with things. There was one scene where Merlin, who, by the way, is aging backwards this whole time, says something, and then, like, everyone gets mad at him because he misgendered someone, which I get that that's, like, a really harmful thing that happens, but in my experience, trans people, they don't really want you to make a huge deal about stuff. Like, they would rather you just be like, oh, my bad, acknowledge it, and then move on. But again, I can't speak to that rep, so I don't know. But then after that point, everyone that Merlin met, he was like, what are your pronouns? And it just was very, like, not realistic. It also read really young, which I think could have played into that. that when I read YA, I like to know, I don't mind reading middle grade and like younger fiction, but I like to know going into it. So I'm like sort of mentally prepared. And I felt like this book combined elements of like new adult, but it was written like it was for very young people. But I don't think that was on purpose. It just didn't work for me. I wasn't into it. The other big thing that bothered me is that there was like literally one of the planets was like medieval themed. And I just thought that was the stupidest concept in the whole world. I just really hated this book. Also, not all of the characters paired up and none of them had any chemistry. So I'll say that too. I really hated it. I hated that book so much. That was probably the book that I was most disappointed by and really, really hated the most. Sorry if the camera angle changed. I had to change the way I'm sitting because I've been sitting here for a while now, but we are almost finished. So I have a couple more books that I want to talk about. The Goldfish by Donna Tartt. This book is so long. It won a Pulitzer Prize, and it was garbage, in my opinion. It follows Theodore Becker, who his mom, the beginning of this book is phenomenal. The writing in this book, great. The plot line, just so convoluted, and this was compared to Charles Dickens, but I think only in the sense that Theodore Becker becomes an orphan, and everyone is not even morally gray, they just suck. Every character was just bad. Like, Theodore turns into, like, a bad person, and then is sad that his life is not going great because he's a bad person. And I just didn't like it. I didn't sympathize with him, which I think you were supposed to. I didn't find it interesting. I didn't really care what was going to happen next. Like I said, the beginning of this book was so great. The premise of this book is that Theodore Becker's mom dies when he's like 12 in a terrorist attack in New York City. That takes place at an art museum, and this Goldfinch is her like favorite painting, and he steals it from the rubble of this art museum and takes it with him when he has to go live with his dad. Then he makes friends that, like, I also listened to parts of this with the audiobook, which was a mistake because the person does, like, a horrible Russian accent for Boris, which is his, like, international school friend or whatever. I really hated that part of it. I think that kind of stuff is gimmicky. I also have noticed about myself that I don't like books written in dialect. It takes me out of the narrative. It's harder for me to read. I just don't feel like it. I think it does the opposite of what it's supposed to do. Like, I think when an author writes something in dialect, they're intending you to be, like, more inside of that character, and it just makes me, like, realize that I think it's dumb. I don't always mind when narrators of audiobooks do accents for characters, but I would prefer just having a different cast. I don't really understand. Just read the book, I think. But anyways, more than 3 million people bought a copy of this book, and I just think it's bad. I just think it was bad. I thought it was bad. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. But I know that that's a well-loved book. And this is another book that is really well-loved and was really well-received that I didn't really like. Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Now, since I have put this down and decided that I'm not going to finish the Thomas Cromwell series, this is book 1 in the Thomas Cromwell series, which is a historical fiction series that follows Thomas Cromwell. The reason I didn't like this book is I didn't like the writing very much. It was very stop and start with pacing. I didn't feel like it was paced well. And I also I don't know enough about Tudor England, I think, to really get what you were supposed to get out of this. However, Sunbeam's Jess was talking about the final book in this. She's British, so she does have a little bit more context probably for Tudor England and what all of this stuff is like. But she mentioned in her like most recent wrap-up, I think from her November books, she read The Mirror and the Light. What is it called? The last one in this trilogy that came out this year. And she said in that like video when she was touching on Hilary Mantel's works that she thought this was the hardest one to get into. It's the hardest one to follow, and it's also the one that has the least historical context, just because we don't know a whole lot about Thomas Cromwell at the beginning of his sort of life and career, which is what this book is kind of about. So now I'm maybe thinking about picking up the other ones. I don't know. I do want to watch the show, I think, because it sounds interesting, but all in all, this was a disappointment to me. I pushed myself through it. I wanted to quit reading this so many times. I vlogged my reading experience of this as well. It just wasn't good. It wasn't for me. I wasn't into it. It was a no from where I'm sitting. No. Another book that I read this year that I really didn't like, but ended up on at least one Best Books of the Year list was Followers by, what's her name? Megan something, I think? I might be wrong. It'll be up here somewhere. This book is like a dystopian that's half set in present day and then half set in the distant future, or like not distant, but like near future, like 20 years from now, where YouTube and reality TV have kind of like combined. So influencers are constantly filmed, like they're on a reality TV show, but they also act like it's just their normal life. I don't know, very confusing, but people like watch and you have followers the way you do on social media, but it's like reality TV kind of, but you can pick from whose perspective on the show you want to watch from, which, to be honest with you, is a very interesting concept. However, I thought it was strange that the characters were in their 30s because this, again, read really young. It read like YA, which I wasn't super into. I also much preferred the like the more present day timeline. And you know that the characters that are in the present day are going to be characters in the future time. This book also, in my opinion, took a lot of time to like build to what was happening, and then it sort of, nothing happened, I guess. There's also this thing called the spill, which is like this big disaster that the whole book is leading up to where you're finding out what the spill is, and then they literally take like a page to tell you what the spill is, and it's just, it wasn't that good. I feel like it was a lot of build up for not a lot of reward. Wasn't into it, wouldn't recommend it. Again, conceptually very interesting, but also kind of fake deep, just not for me. And then the last book that I'm gonna mention in this video is a book that I actually just read. It's Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi. This, I do think I was expecting a horror Frankenstein retelling, and that's not what this book really is. This also has a lot of points of view that I had a hard time following. I didn't like the tone of it, and I mentioned this in my wrap-up when I talked about this book. Just because it is a translated work, I think it suffered in the translation, and I think some of the things didn't quite translate seamlessly. The pacing felt a little off. It just wasn't, A, it wasn't what I was looking for. B, I didn't have enough context, I think, to really understand the conflict in Iraq and the feelings at that time. I've read a lot of reviews from people who are either Middle Eastern, older than me, or Iraqi, and they have talked about how this, like, it very much encapsulated the fear that people were living in and just, like, the horror of everyday life. But it just isn't, ultimately, it wasn't what I was looking for in a book, and for that reason, I didn't really like it. But those are the some number of books that I really didn't like this year. Those are really the only books that I would consider books that I didn't like. Those are also the only books that got 2 or 1 stars or were DNFs from me. I'd love to know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, and if you liked them, please tell me. I know Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe really likes Donna Tartt, and she likes the Goldfish. I'm still, like, I would love to have a conversation with you, Olivia, if you're watching this, about the Goldfish, because I just truly didn't get it. And I feel like I must be missing something, but also, you know, every book is not for every person. And I totally get that. That's like the beauty of there being so many books to read. But please do let me know what your most disappointing books of 2020 were. And if there's anything on this list that you were looking forward to reading or still are wanting to read, I would also love to know that. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!